Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to today's webinar, Navigating the Internationally Educated Nurse Process, the New Brunswick Model. Before we begin our webinar today, we would like to begin with an acknowledgement that N4 is hosted at CHEO, which is located in Ottawa, Ontario. Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. The peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia, and we honor them and this land. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. We also honor all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. My name is Mariah, and I will be hosting and moderating the webinar today. And I'm joined today with Andrew Tomeyer, N4's Education Coordinator. Andrew will be monitoring the chat box today. And I'm now very pleased to introduce to you today's presenter, Mr. Robb Parker. And Robb, I'm going to ask you that you turn on your video as I introduce you. Robb Parker is the Internationally Educated Nurse Navigation Service Lead with the Province of New Brunswick Department of Health. As a New Brunswick native, Robb has been highly engaged throughout Atlantic Canada in the areas of international relations, enrollment management, and human resource recruitment initiatives for over 25 years. Having worked in both the public and private sectors, Robb has developed an expertise in the field of client engagement built around a customer service-oriented delivery model. Thanks so much for joining us today, Robb. We're looking forward to today's webinar. And just a friendly reminder that today's session is being recorded, and we will upload it to the N4 platform as soon as it becomes available. Should there be any technical issues during this webinar, we will inform you with details for an alternate makeup session. And before we begin today's event, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you to our platform to help enhance your participation experience. Throughout today's session, we invite you to write your questions in the question and answer window. And we know sometimes you may have a similar question to someone else or be interested in a particular response. So you have the option of upvoting a question today. Please upvote questions you are interested in hearing the answer to, and we will prioritize which questions we pose to Robb first. And our speaker today has no conflicts of interest to declare. And with that said, let's jump right into today's presentation. I will pass the virtual podium over to you, Robb, to take it away.
Great, thank you, Mariah. New Brunswick is very pleased to have you all join us this afternoon so that we can talk a bit more about the IEN Navigation Unit. As Mariah said, my name is Robb Parker, and I'm the lead on the IEN Navigation Service under the Health Workforce Planning Branch with the Department of Health in New Brunswick. The IEN Navigation Unit was created to help those trained outside of Canada looking to practice as a registered nurse, a licensed practical nurse, or even as a non-regulated nursing resident care attendant, PSW. We assist with the required services for credentialing recognition, as well as making links to the required competency trainings and, when the time comes, to the employers. Mariah, if I could just get you to advance to the next slide. Now, for many of you, you may already know some of what I'm about to cover, but the reason that the type of assistance that's been created under the IEN Navigation Service was required is that transferring professional credentials from one country to another can be a very daunting task. It frequently requires dealing with a variety of regulatory boards, training institutions, previous employers, and other stakeholders as part of the process, all while simultaneously undertaking the complicated task of immigration procedures. Recognizing that this can seem an overwhelming task for many, even those who are most highly motivated, the New Brunswick government created a series of initiatives designed to assist those looking to have their previous training and experience recognized to practice in their chosen field here in this province. These supports for nurses are under the IEN Navigation Unit. For an IEN to become registered to practice in New Brunswick, and in fact anywhere in Canada as a whole, as either an RN or an LPN, there are a series of steps, each one leading to the other, which must be completed. It begins with an advisory report, the NNAS, and it ends with a license to practice, the NCLEX for RNs or CPNRE for LPN. Each of the steps has a task which must be achieved and submitted before moving on to the next. Beginning with the NNAS report, which is always the first step for an IEN wanting to work as an RN or an LPN in Canada. Applicants fill a request directly through the NNAS website. They have to submit supporting documents, and these include all records of employment in the nursing field, either in Canada or abroad, as well as all post-secondary training records. The NNAS advisory report is basically a verification of credentials and a comparison of the complete background of that nurse trained here in Canada. Once completed, NNAS will send the results to the Provincial Regulatory Board. In this case, for New Brunswick, it would either be NANB or ANBLPN. In addition to filing an application to NNAS, the candidate also completes an application with the Regulatory Board. Once the Regulatory Board receives the results of the NNAS advisory report, they then notify the candidate of the next step. The results of the NNAS advisory report will state one of three things: equivalent, somewhat equivalent, or not equivalent. While in rare exceptions, some candidates may be issued a direct route to registration and licensure. For most IENs, the NNAS advisory report will identify specific areas where additional training specific to the scope of practice in Canada will need to be addressed prior to practicing as an RN or an LPN. Based on the results of the advisory report, the Regulatory Board will determine what additional training is needed to meet the licensing requirements and may recommend a further credential assessment, which could include what courses and potentially what clinical classes must be completed by the candidate. For RN applicants, that assessment is a hands-on, in-person clinical simulation exercise of either 2 or 4 days. It's called NCAS. The results of the NCAS assessment then determine which gap training and bridging courses must be completed. For New Brunswick RN applicants, these bridging courses are delivered by our provincial college network, MBCC, and CCNB for our French candidates through a program called MB Crib. Each course, and there are up to 13 of them in total, has a variable start date throughout the year, and most of the curriculum is covered through instructor-led online delivery. Required clinical courses are done on-site and in person. For those applying as an LPN, any required bridging is carried out by the LPN regulator through their gap training program called Pathways. Now, IENs looking to undertake the credential recognition process in Canada should estimate between 10 and 29 months for a timeline to complete the registration. And the total cost for the credential recognition can vary depending on the depth of gap training and assessment required, but we usually tell candidates to estimate approximately $5,000 to $13,000 Canadian. Now, in addition to helping overcome barriers and provide directional guidance, the IEN Navigation Service in New Brunswick can also help with linkages to funding assistance for candidates enrolled in the process, including reimbursements for the NNAS report, applications to the Regulatory Board, and subsidies to the tuition costs of both the NB Crib and the Pathways program. So at this point, I'd like to give you a snapshot of the IEN unit itself. Mariah, if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. Well, not all IENs currently in New Brunswick or expressing interest in coming here are connected to the IEN Navigation Service. The aim is to have the IEN unit be the first point of contact for all candidates considering New Brunswick. Our ongoing list of candidates is generated through direct recruitment, virtual and in person, as well as referrals from relevant stakeholders, including employers, both acute and long-term care, regulators, and other government departments. Once in contact with the unit, the team members work with the candidate to ensure that they move through each of the steps that I've just described as efficiently as possible. We have team members that include an embedded immigration officer, a regulatory liaison officer, and a settlement coordinator, so that the unit can ensure that all candidates get the service they need when they need it. This helps, of course, to ease some of the greatest challenges most IENs face, including an appropriate immigration stream, funding for the credentialing process, and connections to the employers for both job opportunities at the various levels of scope of practice. To give you some indication, New Brunswick started the IEN unit in the spring of 2019. And we all know what also happened not too long after that, just as we were getting the program up and running, which was around the fall of 2019. We were about to start recruiting our first group of individuals, and COVID hit us early that next year. And that meant we really had to regroup, think about what we were doing, how we were doing it. Now, prior to the implementation of the program, there had been less than 5 IENs who had gained licensure in the province of New Brunswick in the previous 3 years. So with the work that we did in 2019 and early 2020, we identified 100 candidates to work with specifically and use the IEN Navigation Unit as a pilot based on the processes and assisting them in terms of their aims to achieve their end goal. As we worked with them, we found that there was a great deal of interest in working with us, both from the candidates and the various stakeholders involved. So we moved the pilot from a formalized program, and at this time, we currently work with approximately 400 candidates per year. All of them are at various scopes of practice, including PSWs and LPNs, with the largest number being those working towards their licensure as RNs. I'll turn my camera back on. With that, that gives you an overview of both the process and the services that are available in New Brunswick. And I'm going to open it up at this time so that we can address your individual questions. Thank you, Mariah.
Great, thanks so much for that overview, Rob. And I anticipate that there's likely a lot of questions from our audience. I know I have a few follow-up questions for you.
Sure.
So I'm just going to pull up our questions. And the first one I'm seeing is, do other provinces offer a similar model as to what you have set up in New Brunswick?
I think that's, one of the things that is very quickly developing. As I've always said with a lot of the stakeholders that I talk to from outside the province, New Brunswick is a relatively small province. So by that, I mean that we are used to cross-organizational cooperation and working together, and we can access each other very readily. So because of that, we were in the perfect setup to look at doing something that involves so many stakeholders. Based on the fortunate success that we've had, the model is being replicated in many other provinces as we speak, which is wonderful news for IENs looking at coming to Canada. And even within New Brunswick itself, the model has now been adapted so that we are dealing with both IENs and IEHPs, so internationally educated health professionals, working with those outside of the nursing profession, but still within the healthcare sector. So each province is different. The nursing pathway is a national path. It begins with a national assessment, but nursing itself is regulated by the provinces. So each province is slightly different. And so what you will see is that in some provinces, some of the efficiencies that we've achieved in New Brunswick are also available. In other provinces, there will be different types of efficiencies and incentives that are being offered at this point in time.
Great. Thank you so much, Rob, for that response. And you mentioned some provinces. Are you able to expand on what provinces those might be? I know we have some participants here from different provinces across Canada.
Sure. Honestly, Mariah, that's something that you would have to touch base with the province itself, because things are changing on an ongoing basis. There are things being announced daily. So if I were to say this province does this or this does this, that would be sort of outside my story to tell, and I might not be accurate. Sometimes, some days, I have a hard time keeping track of what's going on in New Brunswick.
That's completely fair. Thank you, Rob. We will keep an eye out as well to see different provinces replicating this particular model. And the next question here is, can you tell us what makes this program so successful?
I think it's really been about the fact that, what IENs are undertaking is definitely a life-changing decision on their part. They're thinking of leaving whatever country they're in. They're thinking of continuing a profession, but in a very different context than what they might have experienced before. They're uprooting families. These are all major life-changing decisions. And I don't know about anyone else, but when I've been at that stage of my life, at any point, you just want somebody who can help you answer any questions you have as you proceed forward. And so I think that's why this service has been so useful, in that myself and other members of this team, I don't know the answers to everything. But what I try to do for each of the candidates is make sure that I'm connecting them with the person who does have that answer when they need it. So in many ways, we become their person. It doesn't matter that I'm not, my role within this team is more collective and keeping all of the team members moving forward. But oftentimes, if I'm the first person to talk to an IEN, even if their question is about where am I going to enroll my child when I land in Moncton, New Brunswick, and they have to start school, they send that question to me. And I will then make sure that they're connected with our settlement services for the community that they're going to. Not that I know which school that child should be enrolled in, but I get to know their children's names because of conversations like that. And so it becomes very much an ongoing and deep level of conversation with the candidates and those of us who are here to help them achieve their goals.
Great, Rob. I think that person-to-person contact cannot be underestimated. There's so much information out there, but sometimes speaking to someone directly is just so important, especially when you're new to Canada.
Yeah.
And does IRCC tell you about or link you to skilled workers, such as internationally educated nurses?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Does how do people find out about the model? I know you did touch on the referrals, how people hear about you. Is there any linkage with IRCC telling you about internationally educated nurses that are coming to Canada?
We have done actually our first direct recruitment mission was to have been to Southeast Asia in the spring of 2020. And so we were due to leave early April. And of course, COVID launched itself in March. And so based on that, we had to stop and think about how are we going to access these candidates. And we were working very closely with the embassy in Hong Kong. They were promoting the event for us. And so what we did was we turned it into a virtual event. And you got to remember that before COVID, the whole concept of Teams or Zoom was relatively new in a professional environment, particularly. And so we set up a Zoom call. and we sent invitations out via the embassy to it, and they did advertising for us. We had close to 1,000 people say that they were interested in coming and listening to us, and we screened that down based on those who had the highest likelihood of being able to move forward, both from an immigration and a credentialing point of view. And we had 300 people who attended the event. And it was from that group of 300 that we eventually started working with our initial group of 100 IENs. So our service, we promote it obviously within our own websites. And then we work very closely with both IRCC and our provincial immigration office, ONB, to promote events for specific markets. So for example, we just returned, I guess it's been about a month ago now, from an in-person event in London, UK, as well as one in Dubai. So the Dubai event, we actually brought employers with us, and everybody had been pre-screened so that they were able to interview candidates on site and then make job offers before we even left the UAE.
Great, thank you, Rob. And building on that, can potential IENs begin the registration process before moving to Canada? If so, how much can be done prior to arrival?
Sure. And I think that's crucial. And I'm speaking here widely because, as I said in the presentation, the first step for any IEN has to be an NNAS report. That's done entirely online. So they can start that at any point, and they choose the province to which they want the report sent to. For the ones that the IENs that we are working with specifically, what we try to give them as a model, there are 3 things here that they're trying to accomplish: immigration, credentialing, and employment. If they try to stack those up and do one at a time, focus only on immigration first, and then focus on credentialing, and then focus on employment, it can take them 3 to 5 years to get from beginning to end with all of those things. So that's one of the advantages of the IEN unit, is that we have additional supports for them. We have people who are there to help them achieve all 3 of those things simultaneously. So they begin the immigration process. They work with our immigration officer to identify which immigration path is most viable for them. They begin the credentialing assessment process with an NNAS. They will also have to do some of the ECA, educational credential assessments for immigration, but those are different than the ones that are required for nursing. So the more simultaneously, the more that we can have them working on all those pieces together, the less time it will take them to get to their end result. So yes, most definitely. There are a variety of pieces, immigration specifically, as well as the beginning end of the credentialing assessments, the reports and reviews and submissions to the regulators that should all be started well before they ever arrive in province or in country.
Great, thank you, Rob. And several IENs report that the process to obtain licensure is long and expensive. And you just validated that when you mentioned 3 to 5 years, this whole process it can take. So what do you see as the biggest barrier or pain point in the process for IENs? And how do you think this could be improved?
Well, I think, I remember one of our early conversations, Mariah, we talked about, for New Brunswick, the approach that we've taken has been that we recognize there are a lot of stakeholders in this process. So there are federal stakeholders, there are provincial stakeholders, there are educators and regulators, and there's the candidates themselves. Our approach in New Brunswick was not to actually change the process. We wanted to find out how to make it more efficient to help the candidate achieve all the things that the individual stakeholders were setting out before them. Because it's not our role to decide whether or not a regulator determines this person is qualified to practice. Our role is to say, this is what the regulator requires. How can we get you there as quickly as possible? So one of those ways of creating that efficiency is what I just spoke about, encouraging and supporting that they look at all 3 pieces at once. Also, keep in mind that almost every regulator in the country has made additional changes at this point. So if you are an IEN who started this process even 24 months ago, you might be finding that some of the things that were causing you difficulty before have been altered and changed. And again, that's one of the reasons that the New Brunswick IEN unit is helpful, is that we're able to stay up on those changes as they apply to this province and keep our candidates informed. I think the biggest example of that might have been the language testing piece. So the requirement to submit a language proficiency test to NNAS was a regulatory controlled requirement. In New Brunswick, for NNAS, the language test that was required was not the same test that was recognized by IRCC. So candidates coming as a nurse had to do two. They had to do the IELTS general or similar for IRCC, but for nursing, they had to do IELTS academic or one called CELBAN. What that meant was I could be a nurse that has an extreme amount of relevant experience. I have a solid education, but because I either can't access that language test that's required, or my score was just a little bit too low, my NNAS report never got issued. So no one knew that I was a great nurse just waiting to get to New Brunswick. So what our regulator did based on what we outlined for them, and by that I mean we showed them, hey, look, this is a point where IENs who want to come to New Brunswick are experiencing difficulty. They took it upon themselves to investigate it. That was something that they could change. So for New Brunswick applicants to NNAS, the language test is no longer required. That doesn't mean that the language proficiency is waived. It only means that the NNAS report can be completed without having to submit that requirement. So it doesn't hold it up. The important piece being the credentialing side, that candidate gets to see that they are comparable, not comparable. This is what you would have to do. In a case where a candidate is coming to New Brunswick, they will have already submitted a language proficiency test on the immigration side. So as the IEN unit, we're able to see, yes, this is a candidate who is likely to meet the language requirement. The regulator will then say, okay, based on this NNAS report, you have a choice. You were educated in an English language environment. We don't need to see any more on the language proficiency side. Or you've worked for a certain number of years in an English language environment. So in the end, what it means is the NNAS report gets to the regulator and the regulator determines whether additional language requirements have to be submitted.
Sounds like a really important process improvement.
Well, it has helped ensure that more IENs looking at New Brunswick were able to at least get that first step completed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And how does your program work with healthcare institutes, such as health employers, throughout this process?
So again, that's another area where we had to make a change because of COVID, but it's one that's actually worked out for the best. Our initial aim was that we would help candidates looking to come to New Brunswick on the credentialing and the immigration side. And then once they arrived in New Brunswick, they could immediately begin any gap training, or they could go to work in unregulated roles. So patient care attendants, PSWs, in either acute care or long-term care settings while they were taking their gap training. But we weren't going to worry about that until they got here. Then with COVID, we realized that even if these candidates had been selected by the province for an express entry immigration stream, that due to the constraints of the pandemic, the federal level was not processing any applicant, regardless of whether they had been nominated by the province or not, unless that applicant also had a job offer in a critical need sector, healthcare being one of those, of course. So we did a virtual employment connector fair for all of our candidates. We invited our long-term care sector, our nursing homes, our special care homes, our acute care regional health authorities, so our hospital settings, to come and meet with the candidates. We shared resumes with them beforehand. We did a virtual fair. The candidates were interviewed, and then they received job offers. With the job offer, their federal application to actually come to Canada was then processed. What that meant in the end, though, was that candidates had a much greater sense of where they were going, what community they were going to, what they were going to be doing, and that they would be involved in the Canadian healthcare setting. So it gave them an opportunity to acclimatize to nursing within a Canadian scope, even though they weren't at that point going to be registered nurses. They were working in unregulated roles, but because nursing is such a team approach, they observed every day, every shift, what an RN or an LPN does in a Canadian hospital, or what an RN or an LPN does in a Canadian nursing home, the area that they eventually were going to be moving into. So it gave them a much better comfort level for being in the environment. It allowed them the opportunity to earn an income and settle into their communities while they were taking their gap training, and then transition into their maximum scope of practice as soon as possible. So it was really a fortunate win, and it is now something that's the regular part of our process within the program, is that early connection to employers.
That's fun. That's great. That just makes a lot of sense. And another question, can you elaborate a little bit on how you ensure a smooth transition and communication between different entities? You mentioned that you're communicating with a lot of different institutions, and that you're also supporting the navigation in those 3 different aspects with respect to immigration, credentialing, and employment. So yeah, how do you ensure smooth transition and communication?
It truly is a team approach. So as you saw from the IEN unit, all the key stakeholders are represented in some way within that unit. Although we are all employees of the Department of Health, we all are connected very closely with a specific stakeholder. And so as a team, we collectively work with every candidate. No candidate is assigned to any one of us. We share information through a client relationship management software package, and we communicate with the candidates through that package as well. So because of that, we have an ongoing conversation. We try as often as possible to ensure that our conversation is done either through settings like this, so that we're face-to-face, or through email, so that we can capture it within our Salesforce CRM, and continue and always know the history of that conversation and what it is that that candidate needs at that point in time, or what the stakeholder needs. Because so each candidate might be referred to us, for example, by the New Brunswick Association of Nursing Homes. So they represent 78 homes across the province. Every day they receive candidates who want a job in a nursing home. And so what the first step is they refer those candidates directly to us. But we link them in our CRM to NBANH, so that when we know that this candidate is now ready to go to the employment sector, we connect them back to that specific referral source, so that nobody is being grabbed by another source when they came to us through a different means.
Thank you, Rob, for that fulsome response. And another question, what has been the biggest challenge of the program? Or perhaps do you want to comment on future directions or future opportunities with this program?
I think the biggest challenge, and it's ongoing. Now remember, everything that happens in New Brunswick, we have to do it twice, because we have to do it once in English and once in French. And so because of that, and the reason I say that at this point is because the biggest challenge has been helping the stakeholders and the candidates see the depth of what it was that was being asked, the level of detail, the number of boxes that have to be checked, the number of activities that have to be completed. So I gave you a 10-minute presentation where I just rattled off all of those things that need to be done. It's mind-boggling for most candidates. It's mind-boggling for an employer when they look at, well, I want to hire this candidate. What do I do with this? What do I do with the person? What do I do for immigration? What form do I have to fill out? The candidates dealing with the same thing. The regulators, trying to deal with the volume of traffic, the inquiries that they were getting every day. So the challenge has been to consistently inform and accurately inform all of the stakeholders, because changes continue to happen as we go forward, and making sure that everybody had access to the IEN team so that they could get answers to those questions. And then by that, as I said, I mean both the candidates and the other stakeholders as well. And so we're consistently explaining. So tomorrow, we've been doing this in the province now for 3 years. I am going to another government agency tomorrow to give a similar presentation to what I'm giving today, so that they can understand and help the clients that they're working with here in province already go through this process. We've had similar presentations to this very same organization, but staff members change and other pieces of what we do change. And so that's the biggest challenge. One of the things that, and I don't say it lightly, but it sounds that way, for most health professionals who are trained outside of Canada, it's not only a very difficult process, there's no clear path. So if you're a psychologist or a physiotherapist, the only advice you're going to get, if you're trained outside of Canada, go talk to the national board for that profession. And then it can be all over the place. For nurses, yes, it starts at the national level, and it's not easy, but the road is there. Now the road is full of potholes, stop signs, barriers, but there is a road. If you continue down that road, at the end, you will get your eventual outcome. So the navigation service is set up to help you continue down that road. So that's the good news with nurses, is that the path is not completely smooth, but there is a very clear path. Step 1 to step 30.
Thanks, Rob. And do you have any data related to how many program participants you have that you can share with us and their success rate with obtaining licensure?
Sure. We've talked about timelines. So 2 years is not atypical for an IEN to go from first in immigration inquiry to working as a registered nurse in New Brunswick. So when we look at our first group, that pilot group that started at 100, we have 80 of those candidates that 2 years later are now here in the province. Of those 80, 79 are now registered nurses working at their maximum scope of practice. If you ask me 6 months from now, some of those RNs may have decided that New Brunswick's not the spot for them and they're going somewhere else. Obviously, in Canada, that's their prerogative. We're doing everything we can to ensure that their experience in New Brunswick is a positive one, that they want to stay here. And in most cases, they do that. But I say that only because the number that I just gave you will change. We know that. But it was because of that that we went from pilot to program. Our overall target within that pilot, as I said, was 100, and we were allowed 3 years to achieve that. Because we achieved it in 12 months, we expanded the team and expanded the outcomes that are now expected, so that our annual target, and I alluded to this just briefly, is approximately 400 individuals per year coming to New Brunswick as a result of the direct recruitment and in-person activities, practicing at the various scopes.
Great. Thank you, Rob. That's a very high success rate, 79 out of 80 practicing within a 2-year period.
It is, but also, we had the luxury of 79 people, though it's big for the employment pool in New Brunswick. It's been a wonderful addition to our overall employment pool. That's not a huge number. So that's, what I was saying earlier, is that 79 people I worked with for the last 2 years, the team worked with, we know each other. we were able to make those connections and provide them a level of service. As the numbers go up, we have to provide the same service, but it won't be quite as personal. I shouldn't say that. It'll be just as personal, but I'll have to look up their details in order to be able to know that much about each of those candidates.
Right, right. And it's good to hear it's expanding. There'll be greater
Exactly.
capacity. Absolutely. And I'm just curious as well, are there plans to follow those who have become licensed to see if they remain in New Brunswick?
Absolutely. But that will be a 3 to 5 year plan. Again, just knowing the amount of time that it takes for them to get here. And, we still have the additional 21 candidates within the pilot that we are still communicating with. They just haven't landed here in province. They may choose to land somewhere else, but that's what I said. In terms of the number, it will change. There will be follow-up. That's part of the role of our IEN settlement coordinator. She will be doing 2 years out, 3 years out, 5 year out follow-ups with these candidates to see how they're making out. And we still, even those who have been here now for, some of them have been here a year, I still hear from them to say, this is where I'm at now and this is what I'm doing. So it's been a great experience overall.
And how do you know when you stop supporting these candidates? Is it after they've been employed, or do you still provide that support while they're beginning their employment?
So for us, we are providing the support up to the point where they are registered with their maximum scope. So if they're registered as an RN or registered as an LPN, at that point, there's not much more that we're offering them because they're already here, they're already employed, they've done all of their gap training, they've completed everything that they originally set out to do. However, there's no shutoff valve. If that candidate were to contact us, and it has happened, to say that, my current employment situation is not really where I want to be. I'd like to go in a different direction. Or I've who's just landed in Canada in a different part of the province. Can you connect me with an employer there? The answer is obviously yes. We will continue to provide them with whatever assistance we could, but we just do that anyway.
Thanks, Rob. And in terms of your international recruiting that you've been doing, how does New Brunswick ensure that Canada is respecting the World Health Organization Global Code of Practice on international recruitment? Are there any special considerations in relation to this particular code of ethics?
Absolutely. There are certain countries that we would not be recruiting from directly, because we would try to ensure that all of our recruitment are done under ethical guidelines. So we are aware of those countries that we would not go to because of that. We're aware of reciprocal agreements between Canada and other countries where direct recruitment of specific types of sectors. That would be done under our ONB immigration, so our provincial immigration office. So the actual recruitment events, the choices of where we're going and what we're going to do in specific markets is carried out through our ONB partnership. And the Department of Health and the IEN unit goes to the events and participates, but the actual planning is done by our immigration office.
Thanks for commenting on that. And there's a few questions here related to future directions for the program, the expansion of the model that you currently have to other internationally educated health professionals. Can you tell us more about that, what that could look like, and if there are any particular health professions that you see this expanding to imminently?
Certainly within it would be all of the allied health professionals, although there are some, and two of them I mentioned earlier, psychologists, physiotherapists, where there is a greater need. Social workers is also another area. And again, that's here in New Brunswick. It's not national. It depends on each province in terms of what they have for current labor shortages and what the focus would be. For us, we have started, we have an IEHP navigator. So that person is there. You can find access to her via the website welcomenb.ca. And she's there to at least direct the candidates to the national level starting point. As I said, for most professions other than nursing, it's still very much an individualized process based on where they're coming from, what their background is. So while those things are used to help qualify a nurse in Canada, for other professions, those types of things are used to actually determine what the pathway to licensure might be. So it's very different for those ones than it is for nursing. But our New Brunswick IEHP navigator is certainly open to discussing that with any individual candidate at any point. That would be the biggest addition within our navigation team in the Department of Health. There will be ongoing changes and alterations coming for our IEN candidates. There are currently changes happening at the national level that'll probably be talked about at the beginning of the new year, I would suspect, which New Brunswick will be involved in. Again, with the aim to create efficiencies. So the same steps, the same types of activities will still have to be engaged in by the candidate. But I truly believe that there is a national focus on this now at this point in time to make the process as obtainable as possible.
Thank you, Rob. And knowing that other provinces are looking at possibly having a similar model, what are some learnings from the process so far? And what advice would you have for others looking to implement a similar program?
I think it's more about, make sure you involve all of your stakeholders early on. Everybody has a responsibility in this process. Regulators are there for a very specific reason, because they have a responsibility to ensure those who are practicing in that profession are capable of doing so in a safe manner. So they're very protective of what their rules are there for. Employers have very specific needs about who they can hire for what activities and what they need to accomplish, whether that's a patient who is with them for a couple of days or someone who is living within a facility, and what that entails for the daily needs of that client, who they need to provide that service. Educators are very, very protective of their curriculum, their content, their admissions practices, for very good reasons that make sense to them. So having those stakeholders constantly communicating allows them the opportunity to see how what they're doing affects other points in the process. They can then make a determination whether or not there's something they can contribute or do differently. But it never stops. So my advice is to make sure that you get early buy-in from all the appropriate stakeholders, and you create a means by which those stakeholders can continue to provide feedback as you move forward.
Great takeaways. Thank you so much for that, Rob. And I'm noticing there's a few questions here from IENs themselves.
Sure.
So I'll try to group as many questions as I can together. One is asking, is there a period of time that an IEN is required to work in New Brunswick through a return of service agreement after they get licensed, if they're connected to your service?
Right. What we've asked our candidates to do, there is a return to service, but we've asked them, because they're coming on an immigration path as well, there are already, certain things that they're supposed to show evidence of in terms of commitment to settle in New Brunswick. So that's our key indicator. We want them in the province. We're not tying them to a specific employer. We want them to be able to practice at their maximum scope Again, whether that is as a PSW, an LPN, or an RN, we have needs in all of those areas. Whether or not they stay with one employer, either while they're doing gap training or once they've become licensed, it's not necessarily the key factor. We want them to stay in the province. So our return to service simply states that we're asking them to commit to 12 months of working in the field in New Brunswick.
Thank you. And can you confirm that an IEN must decide on which province they would like to move to in Canada before engaging with NNAS?
They'll need to apply, they'll need to know which province they want their credentials sent to. So NNAS will only send it to the province that they indicate on their application for their report. And for us in New Brunswick, because we will be subsidizing the NNAS report cost and the application to the regulator, we'd already want to know before we started supporting them with those reimbursements that they have an immigration path that is pointing them to this province. So there would be the 2 points of that. There'd be the immigration path, and there would also be an indication from NNAS that that report was coming to the New Brunswick regulator.
Thank you for clarifying. And this next question is from a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. If their client, who is an IEN currently living abroad, would like to retain their professional services to help with the immigration process, is that okay? Or does the client have to work with the immigration consultant appointed by New Brunswick's IEN Navigation Unit?
That's a difficult one in that it depends. There are some countries where the country themselves requires that candidate to work with an immigration consultant as part of their exit strategy. But in situations other than that, as a government employee, I would only be able to communicate directly with the client. So those who are currently working in the field of immigration consultancy, we always tell them we're happy to hear from your clients at any point in time, but we have to hear from them directly, and we can only provide service to them directly. We can't work with a third party.
Thank you, Rob. And at which point of the following process does the IEN have to be physically in Canada? And so there's 4 different, the person posing the question has them nicely written out. Thank you for that. But can you just expand on at which point does the internationally educated nurse have to be physically in Canada to keep going through the process?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's the natural point of when they start employment. We want them here, but they can come at any time once they have clearance from IRCC to land in Canada. That's up to the candidate. Their bridging program, so if it's a candidate that is going through either Pathways or NB Crib to complete gap training as identified by the regulator after the NNAS, those courses right now, and this is where I hesitate because I know that there are changes coming, I just can't talk about it yet. But as it stands today, those courses can only be started once the candidate arrives in New Brunswick. So, and the reason for that is that many of those courses do include a 1 or 2 day clinical, a clinical piece where the candidate has to go and be on site in a healthcare setting. And in order to do that, they need to be here, obviously, in the province. So while they can take care of all of the initial NNAS report, filing and documentation and off to the regulator, they can take care of all of the immigration pieces. Right now, they would need to be in New Brunswick to start any gap training. Even in a future setting, there may be some of the front end courses, so courses such as practicing in a Canadian context, for example, that most IENs are required to take. That does not have a clinical component. So our aim is that eventually, within the next 6 months, let's say, candidates that are working specifically with the IEN unit would be able to take at least that course from offshore.
Thank you so much, Rob. And I know we're approaching the end of time here, and I do want to give the final word to you. So I'm just wondering, are there any final key messages that you'd like to leave with the IENs who have joined this webinar or different service providers looking to hear more about this model?
Basically, I just wanted to, again, say thank you for the opportunity to talk about what New Brunswick is doing and what's going on here on the East Coast. You can reach us at any point if you go to Welcome NB and click into the International Educated Nurses page, IENs. You will be connected directly with the IEN unit. And oftentimes when I'm doing something like this, I don't see the full list of participants right now, but oftentimes I will see names that we're working with and names that I recognize from conversations that we've already had. We're happy to hear from you at any point in time.
Well, thank you so much, Rob. I've learned so much from this discussion. You're so knowledgeable about this whole process. And thank you to those who have participated today. Your questions have been excellent, and they really helped to steer our conversation today and gather more information from Rob. So we will be sending a recording of this particular webinar as soon as it becomes available. We also have several upcoming webinars, and we invite you to join these upcoming events. We also will be continuing the dialogue we've started today by taking any further questions to N4's online moderated discussion forum called Meeting Place. And our co-host today, Andrew Tomeyer, will put a link to N4 in the chat. It's free to sign up, there's no cost, so please do sign up to join to access all of N4's tools and resources. And following today's session, you will be invited to complete a survey to share your feedback with N4. These surveys help us to improve and to seek out new webinar content and opportunities that are responsive to topics you're interested in. So please take a moment to complete this brief survey. And as well, we also have several professional development opportunities. So please do take a moment to browse these on the N4 platform. And check out our N4 mobile app available on Apple and Android devices through the QR code here, or by going to newcomernavigation.ca/iOS or Android. And thank you again to everyone who joined. And thank you so much, Rob, for such an excellent webinar. We hope you can all join us at a future N4 event. Stay safe and well.